Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
I am Ben Lander, a.k.a. the reason we're running late today. Would like to apologize to our viewers if you've been waiting for a moment. Ken had to run and get me from my car while it's parked currently on the side of the road.
Because he got pulled over and the police officer said, I'm not letting you drive anywhere. He was clearly not fit to drive. And no.
My car needs to drink some coolant because it's overheated. So, yeah. But here we are. So thank you for bearing with us.
For those of you that did, for all we know, nobody's watching. But
hey.
Speaking of watching, thank you for watching, if you actually are watching. For those of you that have never seen the show before, don't know what it's all about, here's what it is. This is a show where Ben and I get together, sometimes with other people. Like last week, we had Pastor Jay with us. Pastor Jay, if you're watching, you are invited to come on anytime you want, except today, because we're not set up. Yes, why is my... What's that?
Your mic is going hot and not.
Hot than not? Hot than not.
It needs coolant.
Is it maybe turning on and off?
Maybe, I can hear you.
Check, well, yeah, but are you hearing me through Ben's mic? Do I have a lot of echo when you hear me? Like right now, am I hot or am I normal? That sounds so wrong. She's my wife, it's okay, I can ask her that. So how do I sound? Well, that's because my booming voice. I don't know. I moved the mic a little bit. Maybe it messed with one of the connections. We'll see if it's better now. But Jeanette Harrington is watching us. Yay! Thank you, Jeanette. And Jeanette is actually illustrating what I was going to say next, and that is that we like audience participation on this show. So the purpose of the show is basically where Ben and I talk about whatever people are talking about around the water cooler, but we do it from a Christian perspective. You can go out anywhere on the internet and find no shortage of opinions about everything, including many of the things we're going to be talking about today. But we do try to, in this show, give you a Christian perspective on it. We're not perfect. We mess things up sometimes. We do the best we can. So, hey, if you have any thoughts on what the stories that we're sharing or what we say today, please feel free to put them in the comment section. We are live on YouTube, on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, and on Facebook, on the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. I am monitoring both right here. Jeanette Harrington says she hears me loud and clear. Thank you very much. And Ryan Awanowski is watching too. Thank you, Ryan.
And ironically, what we're talking about today, going back to your point, we're talking about opinions on the internet.
Yes, isn't that true? That is true. Ah, geez, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. That's going to be one of our stories for today.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you very much. If you do have a question, comment, anything about anything we say today, put it in the live chat on YouTube. Put it in the comment section on Facebook. I will see it here on my computer and bring it up as soon as we have a moment here where we can bring it up and we can address your question or comment right here on the air. If I happen to miss it, my wife back there is our backup plan, as she has already demonstrated today. She has little signs with the YouTube logo and the Facebook logo to hold up. She's already held up the YouTube logo for me to see today, so that I know that if I get caught up in the conversation, she will eventually bop me over the head with it to make sure that I'm aware that there is a comment that needs to be addressed. So, I think that's all the pleasantries out of the way. Shall we get started with our first story for today?
Sure thing.
All right, so our first story actually comes out of Spokane, Washington. Spokane, right?
I always heard Spokane, yeah. I don't know.
If anybody's watching, is a native of Washington and can tell us whether it's Spokane or Spokane. Because, look, I want to try to get it right because, of course, where do I live? What city do I live in, Ben?
Havre de Grace.
Havre de Grace, yes. Or, and I've heard that butchered so many times. And, of course, that's not the proper French pronunciation. Havre de Grace, whatever, I don't know. But, locals, it's Havre de Grace. That's what it is. So, anyway.
That's okay. Just wait till you get the story about the Chinese and pronounce all those names.
Oh, wait, do I have to introduce that one? I do, don't I?
We can switch if you want.
No, that's going to be fun. Okay. I might summarize a bit. So anyway, the first story for today comes out of Washington, and there is, for those of you there's a Planned Parenthood clinic out there. Washington State Planned Parenthood Clinic has sued a Christian community for holding monthly pro-life worship services outside one of its abortion centers. There is an organization, it's known as the Church at Planned Parenthood. It's been holding services outside the Planned Parenthood clinic for 2 years now, actually, it's been going on. And there apparently over the past 2 years, and it's kind of reaching ahead right now, is that there has been, shall we say, a lot of unpleasant feelings, I guess, involving this, where there, one story I read tried to make it seem, I don't know how much they were, but tried to make it seem like the Planned Parenthood clinic was somewhat instrumental or involved in this, in getting the city council to pass a noise ordinance that was supposed to be, this generic noise ordinance, but clearly was targeted at this worship service that meant it just once a month for worship. And now you've got a situation where the Planned Parenthood workers are outside holding decibel meters whenever they're there, and they're complaining, saying they're getting too loud. But here's the thing. What's happened now is they've actually filed a lawsuit. And they filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction to basically prevent the church from meeting. And the articles, and I tried to be fair because the first article, the one that I sent you to look at that talked about it, was on a Christian website. It was, or certainly a pro-life website, and so I was open to the fact that it might have been somewhat biased and slanted. So I tried to find it, some stories on it from just local media, and I did, and one of their local news stations up there had a story on it to try to see what they said about it, to see if we were getting the full story. Okay, Amber Torgeson says Spokane. That's what I said, right? I was right.
You were right.
I was right. Yeah, thank you, Amber. Spokane, Washington. See, I knew that E was completely superfluous at the end of it. So anyway, so essentially what the lawsuit is claiming that the church services that are going on outside, and I want to say what the lawsuit's perspective is first before I kind of point out what we've seen in some of these other news stories, including the secular news media story. The lawsuit is claiming that they are being so disruptive that they're essentially preventing access to the facility. Now, they are not physically blocking access to the facility, but they're basically saying, look, the place where you've positioned your church service is immediately adjacent to the treatment rooms. I'm dropping my pen. And so you're making so much noise that it's carrying into, and it's disturbing our patients and our ability to render their services inside the facility. That being said, here's the few things that the lawsuit apparently didn't mention. Number one, the services they're waiting to hold the services until they're closed.
6 p.m.
I mean, literally, 6 o'clock p.m. Literally, the Planned
business
Parenthood
hours.
facility isn't even open at the time that they're holding the worship services. There's this was a good one. I'm sorry, I'm starting with my commentary.
Yeah, no,
on
it's
this one
okay.
because I'm a lawyer. I'm obviously also a pro-life advocate, but this one really bothered me. So supposedly they're saying this. And the other thing is there was, I don't know if it's every time, but recently, the police have been present at these worship services. They have measured noise levels, and according to the police, the noise levels have not exceeded what is permitted because the church, ever since the ordinance was passed, the church has been trying to keep the noise levels down.
Isn't there also a time frame for noise ordinance to take effect? It's like 9 p.m. or something.
Usually,
right?
it depends
So
on the
they're
ordinance,
before.
but typically
Yeah.
speaking, yeah. And so this might not even be, covered by that anyway. There have been no complaints from anybody else in the area, any other businesses or anything. And so all of this just seems so disingenuous, at least in what we're seeing. And like I said, I've looked at multiple outlets on this, but this is the one that took the cake for me. This is a quote from the lawsuit, actually. That keep in mind, now their whole allegation is that the noise levels are so loud, it's so disruptive, we can't do business, we can't hear inside our own facility, nothing like that. Here's the great thing, and of course they're calling it protests,
Right.
and the church is saying no, it's a worship service.
Yep.
But anyway, they say if the Church of Planned Parenthood protests were just about worship and not about disrupting the operations of the clinic, then the Church of Planned Parenthood could relocate to the opposite side of the street in front of the Salvation Army building. Okay, hold on a second.
Disrupt their
So
business.
it's exactly. So it's so disruptive that you can't get any business, but it's okay to go disrupt the Salvation Army. I mean,
Who are
did
probably open later than the Planned
do they
Parenthood
honestly
anyway.
not see how they've just contradicted their own claim with that statement? Whatever lawyer wrote that in the lawsuit should be fired. I'm sorry, and I say that as a lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, wait a minute. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. Either it's so disruptive that you can't do business, or it's not. And if it's so disruptive that you can't do business, guess what? It's so disruptive that Salvation Army wouldn't be able to do business.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway,
I think immediately it lost legs as soon as they said they didn't do the service till 6 p.m., which is after hours. That pulled the rug out immediately for me. I was like, there's no case here. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's so blatant that it's almost comical. I mean, you either laugh or cry, right? Because it's just that clear what the intention is of Planned Parenthood in bringing this lawsuit against the church at Planned Parenthood, which that kind of confused me a little bit because you got Planned Parenthood and the church at Planned Parenthood is
Right.
actually, I guess, their official name, or at least the services that they're holding there.
Right.
That's their name for it. And it's just, like you said, so disingenuous because the claims they're making that it's disrupting business, that it's right outside the patients' exam rooms, which if they're not open, there's no patients in those exam rooms
Right.
because it's not like a regular hospital where they stay overnight, to my knowledge. And so, the whole thing is, it's laughable, honestly.
And notice we don't even get into, look, here's the thing. Last week we talked about Vince's Crabs, or Crab House, or whatever it's called, a local business here, that the owner made some very insensitive tweet, I guess it was. And I'm not going to rehash that whole story again, but we talked about the fact that, they're basically for like 4 weeks now, there have been protests going on outside his business. And one thing we talked about is, they have the right to do that as long as they're not, again, preventing people from getting in. They're not blocking your doors, things like that. That's the country we live in. They have the right to do so. I found it interesting that the church here makes a point of saying that this isn't like on their website, they say this isn't a protest. This is a church service. A little bit, well, I don't necessarily disagree with them. I can't remember the exact language, but it was a little bit inflammatory against, it says, we're having a church service at the gates of hell or something like that.
Yeah.
You're just like, okay.
It's definitely a worship service with a bent to it. But
it is. I mean, there's certainly, but so it's like, I guess my question is, First Amendment protects free speech and protects, the freedom of religion. So I don't know why they felt the need to distinguish. I mean, I gotta be honest. I'm looking at what you're doing there, folks, and yes, it's a worship service. It's also kind of a protest, I mean, it's clearly you're targeting this business, but you have the right to do that.
I think it also says in here that a lot of the messages are directed against, so whatever messages are proclaimed at these worship services are directed, in favor of pro-life messages, right? So, in effect, directed against Planned Parenthood. So it is kind of a
So I don't like that. I got to be honest with you. I don't like the way the church on their website anyway apparently handles that, because that is to me kind of disingenuous. Talking about the disingenuous of the lawsuit, which it is blatantly disingenuous. But this is a little bit disingenuous too, to try to say, oh no, we're just having a worship service. It's not a protest. No, you're having a worship service as a form of protest against what these people are doing. I mean, you clearly are. But that being said, it's your right. It's their right to do that. And I will defend, whether I agree with people or not, I will defend their right to protest here. And here's what bugs me about this story a bit. And again, look, I'm open to, I did look at multiple media outlets. Is there stuff that we're not getting? Maybe. There could be more here that comes up. Maybe I'll change my mind. But based on all the reporting that I've seen on this so far, this seems like a blatantly frivolous lawsuit that is clearly intended solely to intimidate, to take their big pocket lawyers and to try to take these small pastors who have no money and to basically financially force them out, to prevent them from being able to do what they're doing by the power of the purse, so to speak. And it bugs me. Look, I've been a lawyer for 21 years, right? What year is it? Today's 2020, 22 years. So almost, and I will say now that I'm not really in private practice anymore, I can say this somewhat, that there have been many times I've come across, whether it be lawsuits, whether it be workers' compensation. No, of course, I represented claimants, people that were hurt on the job, but I did a few employers in there as well. But I've seen many occasions where I would see an employer that would be lodging a defense against a claimant that was clearly inappropriate. I mean, just this kind of level. It's like there's no way that that is a reasonable defense at all. And like, for example, here in Maryland, there is a provision of the Workers' Compensation Act that allows us to say, hey, if you raise a frivolous claim, and I would argue that it should be applied equally, whether it be a claimant or an employer, if you raise a frivolous claim or frivolous defense, and the commission finds that it was frivolous, then you're responsible for paying the other side's attorney's fees. Now, that's a high burden to me, and it should be. I get that. But in my almost 22 years as a lawyer, I will tell you, despite all the frivolous claims I've come across, I've never met a judge or a commissioner that had the guts to institute that. And it bugs me. And the reason it bugs me is because then you get stuff like this.
Right.
When you're afraid, when you have laws on the books that allow for judges to slam people that clearly are taking advantage of the legal system, but they don't have the guts to do it, then you encourage this type of behavior where the deep pockets will try to intimidate the others.
Why was that law put there in the first place? To prevent frivolous claims. Otherwise, you get people run around suing McDonald's because their coffee's hot. And
well, I'll get you going on that one.
I know.
Okay,
And there's a whole backstory, so maybe that's not fair.
I'll get you going on that one.
But and it's to prevent things like this. And if it's not upheld, then what's the use?
Yeah, but to claim that they're disturbing the operation of our business when they're only there when your business is closed is just ridiculous. It's facially ridiculous.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I predict, hopefully, I mean, I don't know what the bench is like there in Spokane, Washington. See, Amber, I said it right. I predict that a judge will throw this out. I mean,
hopefully, if there's any sense of justice, then
right.
yeah.
I mean, it's just facially ridiculous, but you never know. And in the meantime, they're still going to incur attorney's fees and things like that. And and if you're not, if the legal system is not willing to hold people accountable when they use it in this way, then you're going to keep using it that way. Again, maybe somebody knows more. You want to. Well, I was going to say, if you know another story that gives us more information, put a link in the comments. But as we were just talking about this week, you can't put links in the YouTube. Well, I don't know if you can in the live chat. That's a good question. I don't know how that works. In our comment section, we haven't mentioned this on the air enough. We did have an issue come up with this week where somebody had commented on one of our episodes, and their comment didn't post. And then the next comment we got was, well, why are you going to ask for comments if you just aren't going to delete them? And I did message them back, and just for the record, neither Ben nor I did delete the original comment. Now, we can't see the whole thing in just the notification, but my guess is that it included a link. And the one restriction we have on comments on our channel is that you can't include links in the comments, because for a variety of reasons. I mean, we don't want people, the comment section is not the place to push your product or whatever it may be, and that's a huge problem on YouTube where people will, put advertising. We've had issues with people trying to put, shall we say, links to inappropriate websites in the comments section. Yeah. So if you want to post a link, I don't want to say that because I'm going to encourage something else. But no, but you can't post links. But if you do know of any other news stories out there, or
message us on Facebook, you can do that.
That's what I was not going to say, man.
Oh, never mind. Don't do that.
We're live now, man. It's too late. So anyway. So there you go. That's the Planned Parenthood story. I hope that here's the deal. I don't care whether this was a Planned Parenthood, whether it was a church doing it. No matter what, I mean, it was frivolous and it was ridiculous. No matter what the issue was underlying it. So yeah. Anyway, next story. Absolutely. What do you say?
Yeah. So this story we had kind of teased it a little bit.
Speaking of outrage.
Yeah. Speaking of outrage. This is actually directed toward church leaders. It comes from churchleaders.com. But really, it's more so just addressing the society in general, the society in which we live. But it makes an interesting distinction between the Pharisees of the Bible. So the headline here reads, Internet Outrage, Public Shaming, and the Modern-Day Pharisee Phenomenon. Now, that's kind of wordy, but basically it talks about New York Times writer Tim Kreider. Again, correct me if that's a mispronunciation of his name.
Who's going to correct you? I doubt he's watching.
If he is, correct me. But anyway, Mr. Kreider coined the term outrage porn to describe what he sees as our culture's insatiable search for things to be offended by and then use shaming to silence the offense. So again, it's calling out this whole cancel culture like we've talked about before. Basically thrives on two things. It's the power of shaming it talks about, where people are driven by two motives, really. It's the desire to be right and to be wronged. So in other words, that they are right and that there's some kind of offense that has happened, and so they want to feel justified by that. And talks about how, this creates this sense of entitlement and power, really, that people get from that. It's kind of like an ego boost where they can feel they have the moral high ground, and they feel like there's some outrage, and then people just kind of jump on the bandwagon, and he's calling these people out and calling really the church to do better, Christians to do better than that, not to just jump on the bandwagon, and seeing each person as a real person. The people that are affected by this, I think it was Andy Stanley, he points out in here, he said, all it would take is 5 poorly chosen words to end his entire career and life and reputation. And that's so true of anybody. It's just, we live in such a culture of sound bites and memes and just quick access to information that people don't bother to look at the deeper story, and in effect, don't look at people as real people. They look at them as objects, and again, going back to that analogy of outrage porn, just looking at people as objects to gratify their own self-righteousness, really. And that's where the Pharisee connection comes into play, because he makes a connection with the Pharisees here, where he talks about the Pharisees, where in Luke 18:9 says that they trusted in themselves that they were righteous and looked down on others with contempt. So really, that's the same kind of attitude that we're seeing in our culture of this this public shaming. And really, not enough thought is being given to the effects, the real-world effects that it has on people and their careers. So we've talked a little bit about, kind of just the cancel culture and all of that. What do you think of this article and the distinction? Especially, I liked the Pharisee connection that it's making here.
My thoughts on the article are twofold. And this is kind of funny because one of but that comment I was talking about that the person thought we deleted, and again, I apologize, we couldn't read the whole thing because only so much of it shows up on the notifications, and like I said, it wasn't appearing on the channel. But I saw the first sentence was basically saying that old guy on the left, which would be me,
technically I'm on the left, but if you're looking from there.
From there was the left. Maybe it was older guy. Maybe I'm giving myself too little credit. So the older guy on the left doesn't seem like he can make up his mind, and maybe I'm going to do that again, because I always, lots of these stories, just like, I was like, even the last one, it's like, yeah, I think that the lawsuit was completely frivolous, but I wasn't happy with the way they were portraying themselves on the website.
Try to be unbiased.
Yeah, and so I'm going to do the same thing here, although this is going to be more like the last one, where for the most part, overwhelmingly, yeah, I think this article it hits the nail on the head. We've got have you ever heard the phrase like the anonymity of the keyboard, hiding behind the anonymity of the keyboard?
Yep.
I've talked about that an awful lot, and there's something about being on a computer and on the internet that makes people say things that they would never say if they were face to face, or you would like to hope they would never say if they were face to face with you. And I think a lot of it is because the same thing this author is hitting on, that when we're speaking to someone through electronic media and not face to face, we don't see them as a person, we see them as an object to be opposed in some way, shape, or form. Whereas if you're face to face with them, you can't help but see them as a person.
Right.
And that's why, and taking it to the church level, why, and we're going to talk a little bit later on, I'm going to go about the online thing, online and worship, but this is why, even in spite of everything that's going on today with COVID, the church can't give up on making personal relationships and going out into the world and doing things to help people, because you don't want just the people out there in the world to become objects to you, to become subscriber numbers on a YouTube channel. They've got to be actual real people. And so I think, for the large part, I like the analogy he makes, to the pornography industry, because that's exactly how it thrives.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Now, the flip side, where the one little minor concern I have, and this is minor, is the very last section here, where he talks about even when the shameful story is true. And what the author here says, it uses the example of Ham and Noah, and says, when Ham exposed Noah for his drunkenness and nakedness, Shem and Japheth did not join in the exposing, but reversed it. Instead of forming a mob based on outrage toward their drunk dad, the two brothers looked away from Noah's nakedness and covered him. In doing this, the two brothers also covered and restored Noah's good name. For this, the two received a blessing, and Ham received a curse. Mm-hmm. This is one of those times where the analogy sometimes holds true and other times might not. Right. If they're yes, our goal as Christians should be reconciliation should be to bring people to the foot of the cross so that they can repent and so that we can restore people, not to unnecessarily shame them, and which many times, let's face it, may have the effect of driving them further away from the church. Okay, and so to that extent, I agree. But are there some things that they talk about how they turned away from Noah? It's like, okay, Noah's naked, so I'm just going to turn away and not look at that. That's great, but are you going to tell me that someone's committing genocide, that you're going to turn away and not look at it? That's not the solution for every situation.
I think the analogy they're kind of making here with Shem and Japheth is where they enter the tent. They enter the tent backwards, so they still kind of address the situation, but they covered him up.
Yeah.
Not that, and again, the analogy isn't perfect because it's not to say that we sweep things under the rug either. There are things that need to be brought to light. Sin, when it is brought to light, cannot flourish, and so there are things that are sinful and need to be, and that's the distinction that we need to make as Christians between law and gospel. There's a fine line that we tread, and it needs to be used both, equally. You have law, which exposes our sin. That's the design of the law, the Ten Commandments. That's the standard that we hold ourselves to, understanding that we all fall short of the glory of God, and so we miss those marks when they're drawn out, especially exponentially, like Jesus said. Even if somebody hates somebody else, they've committed murder. So Jesus kind of takes it to that nth level. And then, we hold ourselves up against that, and we realize we're all sinners, and that's why we need grace. And that's where the gospel comes in and kind of covers that for us. So, I think what you're saying is, I agree with what you're saying, that we don't just ignore things.
Right.
Obviously, if someone's committing genocide or just doing unspeakable things, then that needs to be brought to light, and there needs to be, we're called to uphold justice as well, justice and peace. As far as, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. But there are some people who just want to be adversarial, or just some things that are going to be difficult that we have to come up against.
And you mentioned a good point. There are some people who just want to be adversarial, and I think that one thing the Christian church does need to learn from, especially when they're online, is how best to respond to that, if at all.
Yeah.
That lots of times if somebody it's clearly they're just going to be adversarial. Like, I deal with this a lot from an apologetic standpoint, and even talking about in-person discussions. Obviously, as an apologist, I'd much prefer to talk to someone in person than over the internet for the same thing. We see each other as people. It's gonna be a more productive conversation. But I've completely forgotten what my point was now. What did you say? You said something.
There are some people who just want to be adversarial, so how do you respond to them?
And so at some point, you just got to decide, this isn't, there's no point. There's literally, there's no point to the conversation. Now, it might be different if you're in a group and there's other people that are watching or listening. Every situation is different, but sometimes you do need to just brush the sand off your feet and say, I'm moving on to the next
Well, it's like those Proverbs examples that you like to use, answer a fool according to his folly, don't answer a fool according to his folly. And depending on that situation, if there's somebody who's a fool because they lack knowledge or wisdom and they're genuinely wanting seeking understanding, then we can work with that. But if someone's just being a fool to be ignorant because they're choosing to be, then there's no reason to respond to it.
Well, and I do like this about that you mentioned about the example with Noah's kids and Noah's nakedness, that they did address the situation. They didn't just they entered backwards and they covered him.
Yeah.
And so that, to the extent you can, that does have I think some bearing as far as what our perspective should be. Is that our goal is to try to restore to.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, when you're talking about someone's sinful nature, it's not quite the same. We can't do that.
Right.
Only God's going to be able to help address that. And so, but it still talks about what the focus should be. The focus is on helping to restore that person, not to tear them down. Now, Sometimes that may mean, like you said, you call a sin a sin.
Yeah.
But it's how you do it, So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, have we beaten that one to death?
Sure. Let's work on our Chinese pronunciation. Well, speaking of things that may need to be called into light.
Yeah. So, and this is interesting because as I look at this story, I got to be honest, I'm wondering how much of this. So certainly a lot of this is very consistent with what we've seen coming out of China, but then I hit on the word threatens as opposed to what they're actually doing. Let me tell people what the story is about. This is talking about how the Communist Party in China, the Chinese Communist Party, is persecuting Christians by threatening to send their children to re-education camps and by forcibly removing children who have been adopted.
By Christian parents.
By Christian parents. And so basically what is supposedly going on is that if a Christian parent has adopted a child, the Chinese Communist Party is saying, they're threatening to anyway, take that child away from them, presumably because they don't want that child learning about Christianity, and re-educating that child. In fact, in many cases, actually giving the child back to the original birth parents, which always struck me as odd. It's like, well, that birth parent doesn't want them either. They gave them up for one reason or another. You're going to force the birth parent to have to take the kid back.
I think the words that the CCP use says that they return them to their biological parents on the grounds that the children were, quote, trapped by an evil religion. That was their quote.
Yeah, and there's been, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, but there's one person that was interviewed for this story who basically they left China and they said that they had this couple had adopted 4 children. Well, no, I'm sorry, this is two different people. This one actually says the couple had adopted 4 children, but the government returned all 4 to their biological parents on the grounds you were saying. So I guess the headline was a little bit misleading to me because it says they were threatening to remove, but it sounds like it's not just threatening. It sounds like they're actually doing it, at least in this instance. And there's somebody else who's left the country because they were fearful of this. So I guess the question we face here is this. I mean, look, the easy way to discuss this is say, that's wrong, next story. I mean, we all know that this shouldn't be done. And it's not just because they're Christians. I mean, yes, obviously because they're Christians, it's gonna hit home with us. But if you ask me, if I've got a Muslim family, do I think we should be removing their children from them, and re-educating them forcibly? No.
Right.
That's not the way that Jesus did things. We talk to people. We want to have the ability to have free exchange of ideas, but we don't want to force someone into Christianity because that's not true faith anyway, if it's a forced faith. I guess my bigger question is, so we can all sit here stateside and say, well, that's horrible. Okay, now what?
Right, what power do we have to change things? Obviously prayer is of course the first thing that we do as Christians. We see these Chinese brothers and sisters that are being persecuted, and there's a couple other things in here that maybe we'll touch on that we see as real acts of persecution in China. That also should give us pause to think, when we talk about persecution in America, maybe we're inconvenienced, and we touched on this last week, I think, but maybe it's more of an inconvenience for us, at least so far, but we're not seeing the levels of persecution. And I think that kind of contrasts where we see that America still, as a democracy, the freedoms that we still enjoy here versus in a communist regime, what the fruits are of that. So as far as action points go, I think prayer is definitely the first thing that we can do. There are still organizations that are actively trying to send Bibles and continue to support these Chinese Christian brothers and sisters. Now, some are getting out of China, fleeing to Taiwan and surrounding countries, saying that they feel not only threatened but unsafe where they are. And so, as much as we can, maybe, I know this gets into a whole other wormhole about opening our borders and immigration and people fleeing for persecution. But look at what America was founded on. You had people fleeing, a lot of cases, fleeing from religious persecution. And that's what a lot of ethnic groups in America, where their history comes from. So we should be sympathetic to that, at least.
Worldwide, which religious faith is the most persecuted in the world today?
Christianity.
Christianity. A lot of people don't realize that because we sit so comfortably here in the U.S. But worldwide, a number of studies have shown that Christianity is the most persecuted religion worldwide.
I was trying to find the other article that I sent you guys that I don't assume that you're talking about because I don't know what all of the articles you chose were. But, there's those 5 men who were killed was in Nigeria. I was trying to find it just now so I would be able to say the right country. But, sometimes it's helpful for us to remind ourselves as Christians that this is what the rest of the body of Christ is going through, because they're the church too.
Yeah, and we need. I think we also need as a body of Christ to remember that, that these, like Mary Kay says, these are part of the universal church. They may worship differently than we do, but that's not the point. That doesn't justify separating them out that way. But let me ask you now a question, even harder question, if I can. You mentioned that there are Christian groups that are still, sending Bibles and things into China. Okay, I'm going to put on my secular humanist hat for a minute, and I'm going to say, what? Didn't you read or don't you know what's happening to these families in China? You're contributing to that, Christian, by sending those Bibles, by sending your missionaries in there. Stop it, because by you doing this and trying to convert more people to your religion in China, now you're going to make these more families get persecuted, more people get separated. You're contributing to the problem, Christian, so you need to cut it out.
To that, I would say the same thing, that we're seeing arguments here in the U.S. about a government is only just so long as it doesn't infringe upon God's laws, right? And so it's easy for us to sit here and say the Chinese government is wrong, but I still think it's wrong. And so to that secular humanist, I would say contributing or not, it's an unjust government, and it's the right of those. It's the right not by their government. It's a God-given right by those Chinese brothers and sisters to worship their creator. And so if we can help facilitate that, and they understanding clearly the message of Scripture is, do not fear the one who can put you to death in body only, fear the one who can put you to death in body and soul, right? And so it's that eternal perspective that we're always talking about that is that transcends the borders and the politics and everything.
You gave the right answer. You worked your way to that eternal perspective, which is exactly where I was going with the question, because I think we have a battle that we fight here stateside. And one thing I'd like to illustrate, because there may be people watching that can sympathize, I don't know, with that question that I just asked, to say, yes, you're actually furthering the negative effects. You're contributing to the whole thing. But even that question, even that argument, it's based upon certain starting assumptions. All of us have certain assumptions from our worldview, from the way we view the world, that are going to influence the way we're going to see things, and we need to be aware of that. In that secular humanist question that says, hey, you're actually helping cause some of the suffering, Christian, by sending these Bibles in, hold on, that's because you're starting from the assumption that this life is all there is.
Right.
And if this life is all there is, then all you see is the suffering that's occurring in this life. And so you're saying, well, we should try to minimize that suffering. And Christian, by sending those Bibles, sending those missionaries, you're increasing that suffering. And so what you're doing is wrong. But from the Christian worldview, this life is not all there is. And there we have that eternal perspective in the next life. And what we're actually doing is actually having eternal effects, which is far going to outweigh any negativity in this life.
Right, and so the argument could be made, extrapolating that, the argument could be made by not giving the means for people to come to Christ and receive salvation, then you are, like you said, far exceeding any kind of suffering that would happen in this life. You're condemning people to an eternity of suffering,
And that's, I'm going to not go into detail on this, but I'll just say that this is a topic that hits home personally for me a lot, as what I think illustrates a huge problem. And it's going to seem like we're getting totally off topic now, but a huge problem in our country today. And what I just tried to illustrate is the practice of seeing something from someone else's perspective, whether it be in this context or any other context, and trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, I think this is wrong because I believe X, Y, and Z, but they think this is right because they believe A, B, and C. All right, so now I can see if A, B, and C were true, if I'm wrong about X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C are actually true, okay, I can see why they would come to that conclusion, all right? So now what we really need to investigate is X, Y, Z true, or is A, B, C true? What are those underlying things? And I'm going to give an example that's probably going to get me in trouble with a lot of people, but I'm not going to say one way or another which way I fall on this politically, but there have been a lot of people, for example, that are condemning all Trump supporters. If you agree with President Trump, I don't even want to be your friend anymore, whatever it may be. All right, and I see that an awful lot if you support President Trump at all. And what they say is they basically list off all of these horrible things he's said, he's done, and there have been some horrible things that he has said. I'm not going to go into gory detail here, all right? But what they don't realize when they say things like that, And I've said before, I'm a political independent. I take no sides whatsoever on any political. So if people are thinking that, oh, Ken, you're just a blind Trump supporter. No, not really. So I just want to put that out there. But what people don't do is, like I say, they're not willing to see things from somebody else's perspective. Is like, can you see where someone may agree with you that he's done some very bad things, and yet for some other reasons still think that they should vote for him, they should support him. Right. And the classic example I give is abortion. All right. Now I know there may be people that believe they're people that are watching us that may be pro-choice, people that maybe think that they're pro-life. And so let's say somebody is pro-choice. All right. And what I say is, well, hold on a second. All right. You think that you're pro-choice because presumably you don't think it's a baby. You don't think it has a right to life. But obviously the person that you're mad at, who is supporting the president, or voting for the president, I should say, they have a different opinion on that. They think that it is a human life worth protecting. And so now let's take two hypothetical candidates. One is pristine, never cheated on his wife, never done anything. He's been absolutely great. But he advocates for the open killing of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of innocent human babies. All right. The other one is scum of the earth, but wants to protect the life of hundreds of thousands, not millions of innocent babies. Can you see whether you agree with their underlying foundations or not, all right, can you see where someone may agree with you that he's done these evil things, these horrible things, and yet still vote for him because of this other issue, all right? And it's based on those underlying assumptions. Now, again, I'm probably causing a whole ruckus. A lot of people are going to hate me now, but I'm just using this as an illustration of what I think we need to, as a culture, get more in the habit of doing. And that is, don't look at things just on the surface. We get in this habit of looking at the result, the end conclusion, and we don't ask, how did people get to that conclusion? Right. And I think we need to get into the habit of asking, how did people get to that conclusion? Because then we can, number one, figure out what the real difference of opinion is, and number two, maybe start to have a little more empathy and not be so outraged, like we saw in our last story, that we can actually talk and have meaningful conversations.
Right, when all you get are the sound bites and the talking points of a certain party line, then, and not to get political really, but just...
I tried to walk the fine line.
Yeah, no, exactly. But when that's all you have and that's all the only depth that you go to, then, of course people are going to just kind of slap a label on people, and it makes it a lot easier to bash them and to be outraged by them and to see them as an objective that needs to be opposed. Right. Going back to the other one. But yeah, and so when we were talking about, just to your point here, back in 2016, the 2016 election, there was discussion. We did a series, even a sermon series, and one of the sermons was, what if there's no good candidate? And we just encourage people that, again, I think I've said this before on the show, you vote for the according to your convictions and according to the issues, right? You look at the underlying assumptions and the issues and see how even a person A has a clean track record, or a person B has a dirty track record. Vote on the issues, not on the political party or underlying assumptions. Yeah.
So I guess my overarching perspective is, first of all, I'm going to be friends with you. If I'm already a friend with you, I'm going to be friends with you no matter what. I mean, if you want to go out and commit genocide, we might have an issue. Okay, I'm not saying there's no line to be drawn. I'm not. Sure. There certainly is, and that's a conversation that you can have. But as far as just ordinary political disputes that we have day in, day out, I've said it on the show before, I'm a big advocate for the free exchange of ideas, for encouraging conversation, discussion, not discouraging it, and having it in a cordial, friendly way. I don't see why we can't do that.
Right.
And I'm not gonna just because you and I may disagree about something doesn't mean I'm gonna refuse to listen to you.
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
All right, now that we have nobody left watching the show, let's move on to our last topic of the day, shall we?
Sure thing. We good? All right. Oh, we have a comment.
Wait, somebody actually still is watching the show. Jeanette Harrington, abortion is one very important to me, and why I support President Trump. All lives matter to God from conception through eternity. And that's, I don't know if Jeanette, because obviously you're limited in how much you can type here, if that's kind of the same point I was making, but I can, I think anybody, and keep in mind, I want to be fair, whether it's this issue or something else, whether you're on one side of the political aisle or the other side of the political aisle, the application is the same. look at, ask yourselves, well, why don't just say, well, because you've come to some conclusion, I'm not going to be friends, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Instead say, why did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion? And try to see things from the other person's perspective. And then you still may not agree with them, but at least that gives you something to talk about. And it's never, in my mind, it is never the answer to just shut off someone. Well, I don't want to say it. Okay.
Rarely.
Genocidal maniac, yeah, okay, we can get rid of but you know what so yes, there is a line to be drawn. Maybe I should be fair about it. There is a line to be drawn. But generally speaking, the answer is never to shut off the lines of communication.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
anyway.
All right. Well, cool. Our last story then, it's CarrieNewhoff.com. Newhoff, all these names, I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I didn't even bother trying to pronounce them on the last one.
But anyway, this article is really directed toward pastors and church leaders, but discussing the trends of pre-COVID attendance versus during COVID, and even now, well, we're not really post-COVID, but kind of upward trend of COVID, trends of church attendance in person versus online. And it says the emerging trap of doing nothing well. So what this what Carrie is advocating here is understanding that these are interesting times that we're living in, and it still remains to be seen what the full effects of COVID have had on church attendance. What we're seeing, by and large, is that most church leaders are seeing between 10 to 40% of their former in-person church attendance. Now that they're starting to reopen, only about 10 to 40% of congregants have returned to in-service worship, whether that's for one reason or another, whether they are older members of the congregation who understandably are abstaining for a time and want to wait until things get a little bit less restricted, and or they're younger families with young kids who can't wear masks, whatever the reason may be, understanding that right now we're only seeing about 10 to 40% of attendance in person. And it's really advocating for looking at what the trends are on your online viewership versus your in-person attendance, and scaling your resources accordingly. That's really the thrust of this article, is calling churches and church leaders to assess that, and to really it's calling out churches, saying really we're understaffed and under-budgeted for an online ministry, which is looking more and more like it's the future of where we have to reach people, because that's where people are. And so like one of the quotes that it says in here is that if, what's it say? If you're, basically, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't, it's a long article, but they say if filling a building is your goal, then by all means keep doing what you're doing. But if reaching people is the goal, then maybe it's time to reassess how we're doing ministry.
Well, I got to say, even, if filling a building is your goal, keep doing what you're doing probably isn't going to work.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, when something like this, something this major hits a culture, where we've got these new habits, this new way of life that we formed, and we're going to be living for a while. I mean, from all looks of it, we're here at least throughout the rest of the year. This is going to be something we're going to be facing.
Just saw an article, actually Mary Kay came across, but Google, I don't know if she told you this, Google has extended their stay-at-home or their work-from-home hours for all of their workers till summer 2021.
Wow.
So it's at least,
well, and public schools here in our county have gone completely online for at least the first semester, and so, like it or not, I hate to use the word, but there's a new normal. And I think where a lot of people, we all like to cling to the past. People, as a general rule, we don't like change. But if you think that once we get to stage 3 or whatever, or maybe a vaccine is invented, if you think everything's going to go back to the same way it was, I hate to break it to you, it's probably not.
Yeah.
It's probably not. Ryan Iwanowski has a couple comments here. What do you think about Titus 3:10, NIV? Warn a divisive person once, and then warn them a second time after them have nothing to do with them. Well, here's the easy answer, Ryan. It's Scripture. I agree with it completely.
Well, it speaks to those people who just want to be adversarial. They're divisive.
And that's what we talked about briefly before, when I mentioned, sometimes you just brush the dust off your feet and move on to the next town. But and I think it's a fair question that Ryan's asking me here, because I think what he's getting at is my comment earlier about I don't think the answer is ever to just to defriend someone. Let me make a distinction, because that's a fair point. What I'm talking about is being proactive in it. It's like, well, I see that you believe X. Therefore, solely because you believe X, I haven't even tried to talk to you about X yet, okay? Yeah. But you believe X, so I'm done with you, all right? That is not a healthy attitude, all right? If I've talked to you about X, all right, and we've had conversations about X, and it quickly becomes apparent that you just want to be adversarial, then I'm not going to talk to you about X anymore, or at least until maybe another opening, comes up and things that change. Then I'll always be open to it, but I'm not going to talk to you about X. But I'm not necessarily going to shut you out of my life completely. All right. Now, again, there are, and I want to be clear, there are exceptions to that. Abusive relationships is I talked about kind of exaggerating, saying genocidal maniacs, but let's be clear. Abusive relationships that people deal with, yes, you cut that out right away. All right. So there are things where there are lines that should be drawn. I'm speaking more of this. Let's face it, it's the Facebook phenomenon. It's the people that go on Facebook and say, well, I'm going to defriend everybody who disagrees with me. And I'm like, well, just because someone disagrees with you, that in and of itself, without the abuse, without something like that, in my mind, is not a reason to cut them out of your life. And when we do that, all we do is we create pods of people who, this pod believes this and this pod believes that, and there's no dialogue going on back and forth, which just further divides our nation.
Yeah, and I think, Ryan, thank you for bringing that up, because that's a good point. That's a good scripture to look at, because if you look at the context of Titus, that's Paul writing to Titus, and it's really in the context of certainly not social media because it didn't exist, but it's in the context of ecclesiology. It's in the context of the church. Someone who's divisive is really what it means there is seeking to divide the church, seeking to divide the congregation, the brotherhood, and so that's where you warn them about. And so after that, don't let them divide you. That's because they have a certain agenda, which is to divide. That's a divisive person. That's what they're going to do. And so there comes a point where you have to preserve unity above that person's feelings.
And Ryan here says, I brought that up because I had to unfriend people on Facebook because of constant posts that plagued my news feed, and after reaching out to them, it just kept getting worse. Well, Ryan, that would be the example of the plus that I was talking about then. You didn't unfriend them just because they held different views than you did. Yeah. All right. You unfriended them because these actions that they were taking. And another example, and here's another example I'll throw out there. There are times, and on Facebook there are options other than unfriending in this particular circumstance. But there are times where it's like, you know what? I can't deal with it. There are some people that I know are just like every post is about this topic or that topic, and it's always angry, and it's always this, that, or the other. And there are certain times, certain people, and certain times in our lives that maybe it's like, okay, I can't handle that right now. Well, you can unfollow on Facebook, and that's why they did that. So I admit, and nobody who's watching right now, if anybody watching right now is on Facebook, I haven't unfollowed you, any of you, if you're my Facebook friend, okay? But there are people that I am Facebook friends with that I've had to do that with. I unfollow. So if I want to go see what they're saying, I can still see them. I can actively go to their wall, but it's not going to automatically appear on mine because it's just like, yeah, okay, enough is enough.
They used to have a setting where you could turn somebody onto or into an acquaintance instead of a friend. So you could still, they just wouldn't, if they were labeled an acquaintance, they're not going to show up in your newsfeed as much. But let's face it, for me, there are a lot of people that I can't handle being Facebook friends with, but on a face-to-face basis, we can be friendly to one another. But
getting back to that last story.
But but the way they conduct themselves on Facebook is not who I see in person, because Facebook for them is more of a platform instead of a platform. For them, it's a platform to be political or whatever. Whereas for me, I just want to reach out and say, hey guys, this is what's happening in my life, just so you know.
I just think,
oh, go ahead.
Our default position.
I treat Facebook differently than they do, and I don't necessarily want to be on Facebook to see the political platform stuff.
I just think our default position should be to try to make connections with people as opposed to try to cut off connections from people. But anyway, you were saying.
No, well, I was just saying to that point, it's kind of interesting. It just came up this week. Katie and I were talking about it. that really what you're seeing on Facebook is not the real person anyway. It's a representation. They're putting their best representation out there.
Right.
And so, again, people sometimes use that to hide behind the anonymity of the keyboard, even though on Facebook, like, your face is right there. But still, they'll go in wherever else and hide behind that anonymity.
Yeah.
But so, again, that one-on-one, face-to-face interaction still, I think you can't substitute that.
You're right, and it's complicated, and we're not getting too much into where you draw the line, and where you draw the line may be different for different people. What I'm speaking to more is the preemptive strike. The attitude of simply because we disagree, that's it. I'm not going to be friends with you anymore. I'm not going to communicate with you anymore. So, all right. So getting back to the story that we were talking about, our fourth story here. What was I trying to say? I was saying something. That it's not going to be, if you think that things are going to go back to the same way they were before when this all is quote unquote over, they're not. They're not. It's our culture, our society is going through too much. If you want to call it a trauma, I mean, it is, that there's going to be some change as a result of it.
Well, and another point that this article was making that I agree with you that it won't go back to normal, and here's why, is because I think what COVID has done, and I agree with the author of this article, is that really what it's done is it's accelerated trends that have already been there since before COVID. We've seen attendance declining, overall attendance declining, but also frequency of attendance. What used to be regular attendance, which was every week, went to every other week, and then went to once a month. And so we're seeing that, or even churches are seeing that now that they've reopened too. You may get 100 people on a Sunday, but each week it's a different group of 100 people, right? And so it's you get 10 to 40%, and then it still remains to be seen what the true number of congregants returning are, because of that very factor that regular attendance is not weekly anymore.
I realize more and more as I'm about to make a comment about balance again, and looking at it, both don't go too far this way or that way. I see why that other comment on the earlier episode says that I can never make up my mind. But maybe it's a fair point. My fear is, but yes, we need to be proactive. We need to understand that there is this new normal. That's what you want to call it. And so the online delivery mechanism is here. Okay, and it's something we got to figure out how best to utilize it moving forward. And one thing, like what we try to do here at Trinity, is you'll notice it's not just the worship services. We tried, if this is the way people are going to consume, their church, so to speak.
We can get on that too.
Yeah. What else? Yeah, I know. You like that? But what else are they doing? Well, people like to watch, talk shows or talk radio. Hey, what do we do? Hey, let's put out a Christian talk show. And I hate to. I don't want to sound like we're tooting our own horn too much, but you and I met in December to decide on the new direction for this program before any of this COVID hit. Kind of realizing, okay, how are people now? What are they watching? What are they interested in? And it wasn't the daytime talk show, television talk show format that we used to have the show on. It was really more the talk radio type format. And so, you tried to think of other things, other ways your church can use this type of media to reach people. But, and here's where I'm going to throw the flip side of it in, we can't take it too far because, like we've talked about a lot on this show today, you can't lose the personal connection.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so like you were saying, not to toot our own horn, but it is part of a healthy ministry, or really healthy anything, is to evaluate, be constantly evaluating and seeing how you can do things better and what's the best way to reach and reach our goals, which we did. We met, and so that's part of understanding too. Like you're saying, I think there's always that caveat that you cannot replace in-person gathering. You just can't. I mean, look at how we gather as a church. It says a lot, and we can get into all ecclesiology. You're really, that just means what you think of the church, how you do church, and all of that. I mean, it was so impactful for people here when we started doing communion again, started receiving communion, actually coming up to the altar. There's something more than just the physical aspect of it that really is communal. It's really this sense of bonding and brotherhood that the scripture talks about, that the Bible talks about. And so I like to use this analogy sometimes is there's a pastor who, and this was, obviously pre-COVID, this story, it's a pretty old story, but this pastor noticed that one of his congregants was not attending his church, hadn't been there in a long time, and so decided to call him up and see if he could come visit him. And the man agreed, so he went up to his house, and they sat down, they sat next to this man's fireplace inside his house, and didn't really say anything, but all the pastor did was he took the fire poker, and he dug around in the coals of the fire pit, and he pulled one coal out, and that coal was glowing, it was hot, and after just a minute or two sitting there all by itself, it got dark and cold and wasn't on fire anymore. The pastor then took it with the poker and pushed it back into the rest of the coals, and all of a sudden it lit on fire again. And then he said, well, I guess I'll be seeing you in church soon again, and left. But that's the analogy, right? So when we are distanced from ourselves, and understanding here what it's saying is that people aren't even not just not attending in person, but the trend too is that they've declined watching the services online, consuming, but also attending or participating in services online too. So when you cut yourself off completely from all community like that, then you're like that coal. You're gonna, it's true that you can be a Christian without being a part of a church community, but it's only as true as you can survive for a day without food, right? It's not gonna last you forever.
Well, and I'll take it a step further, and that I think that the church is talking about consumer culture, where the people come to church for what the church can do for them, where it's really should be about coming and worshiping God and what we can do for others. When we're talking about not losing that personal interaction, it's not just a matter of the personal interaction amongst congregants, but it's involving outreach as well. It's like you want to really reach other people, not just your own congregation, but you want to reach other people with the love of Christ. There's only so much of that you're going to do online. You've got to be willing to go out. Now, in today's day and age, do you go out with masks and gloves and social distancing? Yes, you do, because that's responsible.
Right.
But at the same time, you can't, take people, like those we just talked to the other day that are living in tents in the woods, We can't say, well, and COVID's going on, so we all have to shelter in place, which fortunately we don't right now, but we did for a while. Therefore, those people don't get served.
Right, they're on their own.
They're on their own. We as a church, we can't do that. And so we've got to think outside the box about ways to do it, but we've got to be willing to still go out and serve people, and that's going to require personal connection.
It reminds me when we did our food drive, was it last Saturday? And Erin from Shine FM was here. She was telling us, I don't know if you overheard her, but she was saying she talked to a lot of other churches or other food closets that have closed down since COVID. They're not serving the community at all. And she said, well, what about those people that get your food? And she said her response was very striking. The response that she got from those food closets was that, oh, well, they'll find food somehow. And she said that's such a depressing response, because that was one of the things, and again, not to toot our own horn, that's one of the things that we really wanted to maintain here is keeping the food closet open, and it has throughout the pandemic, and that's one way of serving our community. There are plenty of other ways to serve the community, but that's really what the church is about. It's about serving others too.
And it's more than just keeping it going. And this is where I think that we could apply this in a lot of different contexts in the Christian church today, is, bad things happen, we get worried about something, and therefore we go into like safety mode, and so we want to cut this, cut that. Maybe we don't think we're going to have the money to do this or that. God may be clearly calling me to do that, but I don't think I have the money to do it, so I'm not going to do it. I mean, whereas I think what we're really called as a church to do in times like this is not just, and the food closet is a great example, we didn't just keep it going, Mary Kay, toot her horn, put on the accelerator.
Sure.
I mean, it used to be, we had a food closet that was open 3 days a week, people could come and get food, and now we have a food truck that's taking food out to the communities. We're going out to these people that are living in tent communities. There's a homeless shelter that we served here at Trinity where we would go once a month or so and make hot meals for them. Well, guess what? The homeless shelter, they can't have all those people in close proximity. So they've had to put them all up in hotels and hotel rooms around the area to separate them. Well, that changes the dynamics. You can't come in and make a big warm meal for people that are living all over the place now. And so what did she do? Now we're getting food from the food closet that they can cook in their little microwaves that they've got in their hotel room. And again, press the accelerator on the food closet ministry to find other ways. As times change, needs change, let's boost our presence in the church to figure out new ways to serve people.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that's another point that this article makes, is that really when people think about their response to COVID, they think that it caused us to be innovative. And I think I've even fallen into the trap of saying it's caused us to think of new ways to do things. But really, I think the point is well taken here, where they said, really, the innovation hasn't even started yet. Really, we were in reactive mode. So it caused us to adapt. And that's what it caused many churches to do. And now that they've adapted and things have kind of gone into a new normal, that creative juices have stopped flowing, right? And so the innovation really hasn't started yet. The real innovation is to look at, okay, where are we reaching and where needs to be reached?
Right, there's a difference between just adapting and, like I said, pushing down the accelerator. Let's go, get moving. Let's go be the church. If there was ever a time in our history when the church should be becoming more active, not less, it's in a time of a pandemic, when that's when the need is out there. So anyway, hey, we've beaten that one to death now. I know it's already like 1:11 here. You know what's funny? One person I know is not watching right now is Zach Kreiner, and the reason I know that is because he was supposed to meet me here at 1 o'clock, and that's okay, Zach. But he texted me to say he's running late, which is fine. He's going to be here at 1:45. But if he was watching, he would know that I couldn't answer his text right now. I'm on the air. So Zach, if you are watching, I got your text, and that's okay because I got to drive someone back to his car. That's broken down on the side of the road after we're done here, so that'll all work out for the best. I did want to throw one last thing, and not on this. We're done with that topic, but just before I sign off here, and that is to give a shout out or to anybody that might be interested in Vacation Bible School. For those of you that don't know, we just started. Oh, we got another comment here. Hold on. Before I go on that advertisement, Jeanette Harrington says, over the 42 years we have been members of Trinity, I have witnessed many changes in our services and have adjusted. But I have to say the change due to COVID-19 has really been a challenge. Amen, Jeanette. You're right. You're right. And I think sometimes God uses that to kind of almost force us out of our comfort zone to get us out into the world and get us doing things. I mean, and I think that, again, I think I'm pleased with the direction of many things that have gone on here at Trinity, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I think what we like any church out there, frankly, needs to do is realize that things aren't going to be the same. Yes, a lot of us, we get comfortable, we like our routine, we want things to always be the way they've always been. Sometimes God shakes things up and says, well, guess what? It's not going to be that way anymore, so get used to it and get moving, because with familiarity sometimes comes complacency. Yeah. Ooh, that's a good quote. I should put that in a button or something. Make a meme out of that. Someone just quote me. Ken
Better
Coughlin
than the familiarity breeds contempt. That's where I thought you were going. But that's, familiarity breeds complacency.
Yes, that's it. Ken Coughlin. Give me my byline, man. You give me my quote.
Ken Coughlin, I'm sorry.
It's familiarity breeds complacency. Ken Coughlin. That's how you do it. So, all right. Anyway.
Maybe routine breeds complacency.
VBS. We were talking about Vacation Bible School, speaking of social distancing and the new way you're doing things. Ties into our last story here. We have a completely virtual Vacation Bible School this year. It is online on the same YouTube channel that you are watching right now. Ryan, I want to ask you, says, thanks, guys. Great work. Ryan, thank you to you, too. Especially your comment about Titus. It made me think. I mean, I really appreciated that one. So anyway, it's completely virtual, online. It premieres every weekday morning this week at 10 a.m. For those of you who don't know what a YouTube premiere is, it basically runs, its initial run is done like a live stream, kind of like this, but it's not actually live, it is pre-taped. But it flows like a live stream, and then once the premiere is over, then you can go back and watch it any old time. So if you missed today's episode of Rocky Railway Vacation Bible School, it's on the channel, you can go back and watch it. Get the kids, even if you didn't pre-register and so you don't have all the materials, there's still an awful lot in there that your kids are going to be able to benefit from it, have fun with it, and if they tune in tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's episode 10 o'clock. They'll get to see Mr. Ben get pegged with all sorts of fruit.
So that's a fun one.
right? That was a Tuesday.
Yeah,
one,
day
right?
2. Yep.
Yeah, so he gets pegged with fruit tomorrow. And if you're wondering where the fruit came from, my wife quickly volunteered to give it to everybody so they could throw it at him. So she.
And Ken was one of those enthusiastic people who threw it.
It was fake fruit. I just want to put that out
fun to
there.
be off camera.
Fake fruit.
Fake fruit.
Fake fruit.
That just makes it hurt more, doesn't it? I mean, real fruit's at least soft and
Yeah,
juicy
it's
and stuff.
plastic.
I don't know, Ben. How did it feel?
Like plastic.
So anyway, Rocky Railway Vacation Bible School here on the YouTube, the Trinity Talk YouTube channel, every day this week, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. But you can watch it afterwards if that doesn't work for you guys. Please make sure you tune in. That'd be great. And share it. Tell other people about it. A lot of people are missing Vacation Bible School this summer. And I think with Christian and Amber and all you guys doing the Bible stories and our Imagination Station folks and Aaron Mooring doing the KidVid Cinema stuff, I think we've really put together something special that your kids are really going to benefit from. So, all right. So now that shameless plug is done, anything else? Are we done for the day?
I think so.
Ready to go get some coolant and get you back to your car?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, ladies
Thank you,
backstage there behind camera for helping us out today. And thank you all for watching. See you next week at 12 noon. God bless.